Welcome to Trapper Rod's Outdoor Pursuits. Today we're going to finish these brass cases and get them ready to be resized and put into service. The last steps are going to be dealing with the primer pocket. The primer pocket on a centerfire cartridge is punched in by the manufacturer, and then most of the time, although these Lapuas seem to be drilled, most of the time the primer flash hole is punched in with a flash hole punch. So what we need to do is we need to uniform this primer pocket, and we need to make sure that the bottom is flat, and we need to make sure that all of the flash holes are the same size, and that any burr that was left from that punch on the inside of that cartridge gets removed, so that instead of a little mounded, rounded punch hole, you've got a little concave, basically a spout or a nozzle for that fire to come through and spread out through your powder column, instead of come through and shoot through the middle and unevenly burn the sides. So we want that primer pocket to have a little bit of a wedge shape to it, and we want that primer pocket to be that flash hole to be uniform in size, so the same amount of fire comes through each time that primer goes off. We also want the primer pocket to be flat and square on the sides. We want that hole to be square down to the bottom and square along the bottom too, because your primer is made up of two different components. There's the cup and the anvil, and most of the primers that I've ever seen have had 3 legs on that anvil, and those legs stick out of the primer cup just a little bit, and that's when you seat that primer. When you get that primer and you feel it just kind of squish in just a little bit, that's those 3 legs squishing into the primer cup. And we want those 3 legs to be solidly placed on the bottom of that primer pocket. If you've ever fired a shot and had it not go off, rechambered it, and squeezed the trigger again, probably what happened was 1 or 2 of those feet on the anvil was not firmly seated on the bottom of the primer pocket, and the first strike of your firing pin seated them down on the bottom of that primer pocket, and the second strike actually lit off the powder because it gave it enough force to squeeze it between the anvil and the primer cup. So we want to eliminate all of that. We want these primers pockets to be the exact same depth. That way the firing pin strikes them at the exact same time. And we want the primer pockets to be uniform and round, square on the edges. We want the flash hole to be the exact same diameter, and we want the powder column to be fed into the little bit of a nozzle, a little bit of a cone, if you will, at the bottom, instead of having some ragged, different shaped ridges of metal. Here you see the 2 components of a rifle or pistol primer. These are the anvil and the cup. In a perfect world, the primer pocket is perfectly square, and the primer will fit into the primer pocket with the feet of the anvil sitting squarely on the base of that primer pocket. In the real world, they get punched in, and the corners are a little rounded, and the bottom is not always perfectly flat. Here's a piece of that Lapua brass that I've been working on before and after primer pocket uniforming. You can see a little bit of the brass has been removed, and the bottom has been made flatter, and the sides have been made squarer. That way the primer fits in it perfectly, and all 3 feet of the anvil hit the bottom of the primer pocket at the same time. Here you see an exaggerated drawing of what happens when that flash hole gets punched in at the manufacturer, and what we're attempting to do when we uniform it. Here's a cutaway of the actual ridge left by that punch. I used a bore sight to look down the case mouth of several Federal .308 Winchester match grade ammo cases. You can see the ragged holes. Now on the Lapua brass I did the same thing, and you can see that they are extremely uniform and probably don't need much flash hole uniforming. This is a picture of the end of the flash hole uniformer and deburring tool. With a broader understanding of why we're doing these processes, let's take an up-close look at the processes themselves. All right, we've got our RCBS case prep center here. We've got our large primer pocket uniformer set up in the case prep center, and we have our flash hole deburr and uniformer set up with the case mouth guide. So we just take our unfinished case. We want to take a toothbrush or a little wire brush, keep the chips off of that primer pocket uniformer. And you'll be able to feel it cut. You'll be able to feel it working its way into those edges. And once it stops cutting, which it's just about finished, there. Then we take it, I don't know if you can see that, then we take it and we run it over our flash hole deburring and uniforming tool. And it's just that easy. Let's do another one. I don't know how well it translates on the camera, but you can actually see the crisper corners down there in the squared off base of that primer pocket. What that'll do is allow you to get your primer seated at the exact same depth on every case, which means that the firing pin will hit that primer exactly at the same time in the impulse of the rifle. As you squeeze the trigger, that lock time, it'll hit that primer very, very consistently versus having one primer here, one primer here, one primer here, one primer here. It'll hit that primer consistently. Yep, that did a good job. So that's it. We are done with all the special processes that we'd use to make these match grade cases. We take this brass that we've got cut, we've got the primer pockets, we've got all of the neck modifications done. We'd size it, run it through a sizing die with the expander ball in it, and we would take that and clean it and use it just like you would once fired brass. The reason we want to run it through the sizing die again is so that we center this neck up, that we take the neck and we center it inside of that case so that that bullet has the opportunity to launch exactly the same every time. So we'll run this through a full length size and then we'll clean it, and this brass will be ready to shoot. Well, I hope you enjoyed this series on match grade or precision rifle brass preparation. I know I enjoyed making it. Thank you for stopping by, and God bless.